There were some interesting comments on my Elizabeth Gibbs video from viewers who questioned two of the statements I made in the video. One viewer took issue with the fact I stated that Alfred Winwood, the delivery carman who ran Mrs Gibbs down, was driving on the wrong side of the road. The viewer was adamant that there was no wrong side of the road in 1887, but that vehicles drove on whichever side they wished. Aside from the obvious chaos, not to mention danger, that this would have caused, it was in fact legally mandated that vehicles must drive on the left side of the road, and it had been the law since the passing of the Highway Act of 1835, albeit the custom itself dates back to the 18th century, when traffic congestion in London increased dramatically, especially on London Bridge, and it became customary for vehicles crossing the bridge to keep to the left. This was made compulsory in the rest of the country with the passing of the Highway Act in 1835, Section 78 of which stated that if the driver of any wagon, cart, or other carriage whatsoever, or of any horses, mules, or other beast of draught or burthen, meeting any other wagon, cart, or other carriage, or horses, mules, or other beasts of burden, shall not keep his wagon, cart, or carriage, or horses, mules, or other beasts of burden on the left or near side of the road, then every person so offending and being convicted of any such offence, either by his own confession, the view of a justice, or by the oath of one or more credible witnesses before any two justices of the peace, shall, in addition to any civil action to which he may make himself liable, for every such offence forfeit any sum not exceeding level 1 on the standard scale. In a nutshell, what this section of the Act was saying was, drive on the left, or else. So, by the time of Mrs Gibbs's unfortunate encounter with Alfred Winwood's van in December 1887, it was in fact a legal requirement to drive on the left. A glance at photographs from the era shows that there was quite clearly a drive on the left policy at the time. This image shows Oxford Street. This one, New Bridge Street. This one, Fleet Street. And this one, Whitechapel Road, with the London Hospital clearly visible in the background. As you can see, the traffic is keeping to the left side. So in 1887, people didn't choose what side of the road they wanted to drive on. The majority of them obeyed the law and drove on the left. Another viewer wasn't impressed by the fact that I referred to the vehicle that ran Elizabeth Gibbs down as a van, and observed, "A van? It was a horse and cart back in 1888. Vans didn't exist." The short answer to that is that vans most certainly did exist at the time, and they had existed since at least the 1820s, if not before. Now, I'm not saying that the type of vehicle that the viewer was probably thinking of existed back in 1887, as it obviously didn't. But there were most certainly vans on the roads of Victorian Britain. The word van is in fact a contraction of the word caravan, and throughout the 19th century it was used to refer to a covered wagon or a high-sided enclosed cart used for transporting goods, such as the Pickford's van that can be seen in this photograph of Aldgate High Street, although they could also be used for transporting people, particularly prisoners, as is depicted in this image from the Illustrated Police News of Saturday the 14th of May, 1870. By the 1850s, adverts for vans were frequently appearing in the newspapers. This one, for example, appeared in the Wolverhampton Chronicle on Wednesday, December the 14th, 1853, and was taken out by Dakin, Shinton and Company, who respectfully announced that they were about to institute a system of van delivery in the town and neighbourhood, and that the van would leave for deliveries every Saturday at 3 and 4 p.m. Then there is this advert, which appeared in the Cheltenham Examiner on Wednesday, June the 30th, 1856, in which William Bowles advertised his large and commodious spring vans. John Kenyon, furniture remover, placed this advert in the Bolton Evening News on Friday the 17th of February, 1871. Note that he heads his advert, "Vans, Vans, Vans." The advert goes on to advise readers that J. K is prepared to remove furniture, pictures, valuable objects of art, wines, etc. to or from any part of the kingdom in first-class covered vans. On Saturday the 24th of May 1884, the Chelsea News and General Advertiser carried an advert for J. Nielsen, who advertised his services consisting of horse, good furniture van and man for 1 shilling an hour. So the concept of man with a van was even familiar to the residents of Victorian Britain. Just like today, vans could also be something of a nuisance to other road users. In a scenario that will be only too familiar to those of us who have travelled around the streets of large cities, the very Dickensian-sounding Ebenezer Purdy found himself in court in June 1878, charged with obstructing an Edinburgh thoroughfare. According to the subsequent article that appeared in the Edinburgh Evening News on Saturday the 8th of June, at the City Police Court, Ebenezer Purdy was charged with having wilfully caused an obstruction to the thoroughfare by means of a horse and van in Pleasance on Wednesday. He pleaded not guilty. A policeman said that the prisoner's van stood on the street for an hour and a quarter without anyone in charge of it. He was found guilty and sentenced to pay a fine of 10 shillings with the alternative of 5 days in jail. And Ebenezer Purdy wasn't the only vanman to obstruct a Victorian thoroughfare. In fact, there were constant reports in the newspapers of van drivers being prosecuted for obstructing highways with their vehicles. There were also frequent reports of tragedies involving vans. An article in the Islington Gazette on Friday the 29th of December 1876 reported that an inquiry was held on Wednesday at the coroner's court touching the death of Walter Williams, aged 4 years, who was run over by a Pickford's van. The accident is intriguing from a Jack the Ripper perspective because the driver of the van was none other than Charles Cross, the man who 12 years later would discover the body of Jack the Ripper's first victim, Mary Nichols. The article went on to quote the evidence given by Charles Cross at the inquest. Charles Cross, carman to Pickford & Co., said he was crossing with his van from Copenhagen Street to Elizabeth Street when 2 children seemed to come from behind a trap that was standing on the offside, all in an instant, running against his horses. He tried to pull up, but found it was impossible. The article refers throughout to the vehicle that Charles Cross was driving as a van. So if, as many people now believe, Charles Cross, whose actual name was officially Charles Lechmere, was responsible for the Whitechapel murders, then Jack the Ripper also drove a van. On Thursday the 4th of March 1886, the Manchester Evening News reported a shocking accident to a baker's van man and went on to give details of the inquest into the death of the victim, Nicholas Winder, who had been fatally injured when his horse had dashed off rapidly, causing one of the wheels of his van to pass over his body. And finally, there are the newspaper reports of the inquest into Mrs Elizabeth Gibbs's death and the coverage of Alfred Winwood's police court appearances and Old Bailey trial, in all of which the vehicle that he was driving is referred to as a van. So there were vans in 1887, and there had been vans on the streets of London for many decades when Alfred Winwood ran over Mrs Elizabeth Gibbs whilst driving his van on the wrong side of the road.